No one will ever want you. She had heard those words her entire life. Defective, broken, worthless. Alawan stood on the auction platform as alpha after alpha turned away, their eyes sliding past her like she was nothing more than shadow and bone. The winter wind clawed at her skin, but the cold was nothing compared to the silence. 3 auctions. 3 winters of standing on this platform while others were chosen. 3 years of watching her worth be measured and found wanting. What she did not expect was the stranger at the back of the hall. The one draped in black, half hidden by the stone pillars. The one they whispered about in fearful tones. The exile. When the auctioneer called for final bids, no one spoke. The silence stretched, cruel and absolute. And then a voice cut through the frozen air. Deep. Calm. Unquestionable. I will take her. The entire hall stopped breathing, because the man who had just claimed the unwanted Omega was the most dangerous alpha in the Northern Territories. The king they had tried to bury. And he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. The morning of the winter auction always began the same way in Frost Hollow, with silence. Alawan woke before dawn, her breath forming small clouds in the freezing air of her quarters. The room was barely a room at all. A narrow cot pushed against stone walls, a single window too small to let in proper light, and a door that locked from the outside. Omega quarters, where they kept the ones who had not yet been claimed. She dressed quickly, pulling on the threadbare wool dress that had been assigned to her 3 winters ago. It was too thin for the cold, but Omegas were not given furs. Such comforts were reserved for those who had proven their worth. Eloan had proven nothing. At 23 years old, she had stood on the auction platform twice before. Twice, she had watched every alpha in attendance look through her as if she were made of glass. Twice, she had walked back to this room with her head held high and her heart in pieces. Today would be the 3rd time. And in Frost Hollow, there was no 4th chance. She made her way through the frozen corridors toward the training yards, the only place where she was allowed to exist without judgment. The Pack's warriors trained there each morning, and though Omegas were forbidden from combat, no one had ever formally banned her from watching, or from practicing alone, long after the others had gone. "You are up early?" A voice stopped her at the edge of the yard. "Eager to humiliate yourself again?" Eloan did not need to turn to recognize the speaker. Malus stood behind her, golden hair perfectly arranged despite the early hour, her lips curved in the kind of smile that promised pain wrapped in silk. She was everything Eloan was not. Tall, elegant, desired, an Omega who had been claimed at her very first auction by a high-ranking beta, only to be widowed a year later. Now she waited to be claimed again, this time by someone far more powerful. "I am simply walking," Eloan replied, keeping her voice flat. "I was not aware that required your permission." Mila stepped closer, her scent sharp with amusement. "Walking to the training yards, again." She tilted her head. "Tell me, Eloan, do you actually believe swinging a blade will make some alpha overlook the fact that your wolf is broken? That you cannot shift? That you are, by every measure that matters, defective?" The word landed exactly where it was meant to. Eloan felt the familiar heat rise in her chest, the anger she had learned to bury so deep it almost felt like emptiness. "My wolf is not broken," she said quietly. "She is simply waiting." "Waiting?" Malus laughed, the sound like cracking ice. "She has been waiting for 23 years. Perhaps she is not waiting at all. Perhaps she was never there to begin with." Eloan's hands trembled at her sides. "Do not react. Do not give her the satisfaction." "Excuse me," Eloan said, stepping around her. "Some of us have more to do than stand in corridors and poison the air." She walked away before Malus could respond, her heart pounding against her ribs, her nails cutting crescents into her palms. The training yard was empty when she arrived. Good. Eloan picked up a wooden practice sword from the rack, feeling its familiar weight settle into her grip. She moved through the forms she had memorized years ago, her body flowing from stance to stance with a precision that had taken countless hours to develop. She could not shift. She could not run on four legs or feel the wind in fur she did not have. But she could fight. And some nights, when the loneliness threatened to swallow her whole, that was the only thing that kept her standing. The sword sang through the cold air, and somewhere in the shadows beyond the yard, someone was watching. Elawan had not always been alone. There was a time, years ago, when she believed someone would choose her, when she believed love was something she was allowed to have. His name was Lorcan. She remembered the first time she saw him with the kind of clarity that only comes from wounds that never fully heal. She had been 16, still hopeful, still foolish enough to believe her wolf would wake any day. Lorcan had been 19, the son of Frost Hollow's lead enforcer, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and a smile that made her forget how to breathe. He had found her crying behind the healer's cottage after another failed attempt to trigger her shift. "You know," he had said, crouching beside her, "wolves are not everything." Elawan had looked up at him through tear-blurred eyes. "Easy for you to say. You have one." "I do." He had smiled, and something in her chest had cracked open. "But I have never seen my wolf fight the way you fight in the training yard. You move like you have something to prove." "I always have something to prove." "Then prove it." He had offered his hand, pulling her to her feet. "And maybe stop crying in the dirt. It is not a good look." She had laughed despite herself. That was the beginning. Over the next 5 years, Lorcan became the center of her world. He sought her out after training sessions, walked with her through the forest paths when no one was watching, and whispered things that made her believe she was more than what the pack saw. "You are different, Elawan. Special. They just cannot see it yet." He never made promises. That was the cruelty she only recognized in hindsight. He never said he would claim her, never spoke words that could be held against him. But there were looks that lingered, touches that felt intentional. Moments when his breath caught as he watched her, and she was certain, absolutely certain, that he felt what she felt. She gathered every crumb he offered and convinced herself they would one day become a feast. But Lorcan also disappeared. He would vanish for weeks at a time with other women, return with stories Elawan pretended not to hear, and then come back to her as if nothing had changed. As if she were a harbor he could always return to, no matter how many storms he chose to face with others. "You are my favorite," he told her once, his fingers tracing her jaw. "You know that, right? Favorite. Not only, not chosen. Favorite." She should have heard the warning in that word, should have recognized that favorites can be replaced, discarded, forgotten. But she was young, and she wanted so desperately to be wanted. Last winter, before the second auction, Lorcan had pulled her aside. "I am not ready to claim anyone yet," he had said, his eyes avoiding hers. "But next year, I will be ready. Wait for me, Elawan." She had waited. She had stood on that platform and watched him stand in the crowd, silent, unmoving, letting her be passed over again. And when she returned to her quarters that night, hollow and humiliated, he had come to her door. "I am sorry," he had whispered. "The timing was not right. But next winter. I swear it." Next winter was today. Elawan finished her training forms as the sun crept over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly it felt like a physical ache. But somewhere deep inside, in the place where her wolf should have been, something whispered a warning. "He will fail you again." She pushed the thought away and went to prepare for the auction. The rumors began 3 days before the auction. An outsider had arrived at Frost Hollow's borders. Not just any outsider. The Exile, the fallen king, the Alpha who should have been dead. Riven of Grimbard. Elawan heard the whispers in the corridors, saw the way the elders huddled together with fear carved into their faces. She did not know the full story. No one spoke of it openly, but she knew the bones of it, the way everyone in the Northern Territories knew. Riven had been king of Grimbard, the most powerful pack in the region. 10 years ago, when he was barely 20, his own council had betrayed him. They had accused him of crimes Eloan had never heard clearly named, stripped him of his crown, and cast him into exile. Most believed he had died in the wilderness. Most were wrong. The man who arrived at Frost Hollow's gates was very much alive, and from what Eloan had overheard, he had come for the winter auction. Why would an exile attend an auction? She had asked Bryn, one of the few servants who spoke to her without contempt. Bryn had glanced around nervously before answering. No one knows, but the elders cannot refuse him. Exile or not, he is still of royal blood, and they say, her voice dropped to barely a whisper, they say his wolf is unlike anything anyone has ever seen, that he killed 12 men during his escape from Grimbard, that he has been living alone in the Thornwood for a decade, and whatever he has become, it is not entirely human anymore. Eloan had felt a chill run down her spine. And he wants to claim an Omega? Apparently. Bryn shuddered. God helps whoever he chooses. Eloan did not think about it again. She had her own problems, her own survival to focus on. What did the affairs of exiled kings have to do with her? But that night, as she walked back to her quarters after the evening meal, she felt it. A presence. Heavy. Watchful. Inescapable. She stopped in the corridor, her heart suddenly racing. The shadows at the far end seemed darker than they should have been. Deeper. As if something was standing just beyond the reach of the torchlight. Eloan squinted into the darkness. For a moment she saw nothing, and then 2 points of silver light. Eyes. Watching her. She could not move, could not breathe. The weight of that gaze pressed against her chest like a physical force, pinning her in place. It was not predatory, she realized. Not threatening. It was something else. Something she could not name. Recognition. As if whoever stood in those shadows had been waiting for her. As if they knew her in some way she did not understand. The torchlight flickered, and when Eloan blinked, the eyes were gone. She stood frozen for a long moment, her pulse hammering in her throat. What was that? She shook herself, forcing her legs to move, telling herself it was nothing. A trick of the light. Exhaustion playing with her mind. But as she lay in her narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling, one question circled through her thoughts like a wolf pacing its cage. Why did it feel like he was looking for me? The great hall of Frost Hollow was filled with firelight and tension. 2 nights before the auction, the pack gathered for the presentation feast, the traditional meal where alphas announced their intentions. It was meant to be a celebration. To Eloan, it felt like a sentencing. She sat at the back of the hall, tucked into a shadowed corner where she could observe without being observed. The other unclaimed Omegas sat near the front, dressed in their finest, their necks tilted in subtle displays of submission. They laughed and preened and cast hopeful glances toward the alphas who might choose them. Eloan watched and felt nothing, or tried to feel nothing. Her eyes kept drifting to Lorcan, seated at the high table beside his father. He looked handsome tonight, his dark hair combed back, his jaw clean-shaven. When he laughed at something another alpha said, the sound carried across the hall and landed somewhere in Eloan's chest. Stop it, she told herself. Stop hoping. But hope was a stubborn creature. It refused to die no matter how many times she tried to kill it. The pack leader, a graying alpha named Theron, stood and called for silence. We gather tonight to honor tradition, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of decades. In 2 days, the winter auction will commence. Those alphas who wish to declare their intentions may do so now. One by one, alphas rose and spoke. I intend to bid for Selene of the Eastern Quarter. I will claim Petra, daughter of the blacksmith. Names and promises filled the air like falling snow. Eloan listened without hearing, her gaze fixed on the table, her heart beating a slow, resigned rhythm. And then Lorcan stood. The hall quieted. Everyone knew who he was, The enforcer's son. The alpha who had never claimed anyone despite being of prime age. The one who had kept the strange, wolf-less Omega dangling for years without ever committing. I intend, Lorcan said, his voice strong and clear, to claim Ilawan at the winter auction. The silence that followed was absolute. Ilawan felt the blood drain from her face. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, then louder, spreading through the hall like cracks through ice. Ilawan, the broken one? She cannot even shift. Has he lost his mind? Perhaps she has bewitched him. Ilawan wanted to disappear, wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole. But beneath the shame, beneath the humiliation of being discussed like a defective piece of livestock, something else was rising. Hope. Bright and terrible and impossible to contain. He chose me. After all these years, he finally chose me. Lorcan's eyes found hers across the crowded hall. He smiled. That familiar smile that had kept her waiting for 5 long years, and something in Elowen's chest cracked open. She smiled back, and at the edge of the hall, half hidden in shadow, a figure in black watched the entire scene unfold. Riven's expression was unreadable, but his hands, hidden beneath the table, had curled into fists. Malus found her before the feast had even ended. Ilawan had slipped out of the hall, needing air, needing space, needing a moment to process what had just happened. She stood in the corridor outside, her back against the cold stone wall, her breath coming in shallow gasps. He said my name. In front of everyone. He actually said my name. Congratulations. The voice sliced through her thoughts like a blade. Malus stepped out of the shadows, her golden hair gleaming in the torchlight, her smile sharp enough to cut. The wolf-less Omega finally gets her moment, Malus continued, moving closer with the deliberate grace of a predator. How touching, how inspiring, how utterly doomed. Elowen straightened, forcing her expression into neutrality. If you have come to mock me, save your breath. I have heard it all before. Mock you? Malus laughed softly. Why would I mock you? You have done nothing wrong. You cannot help what you are. The words were sweet on the surface, poison underneath. Then what do you want? Malus tilted her head, studying Elowen with eyes that held no warmth. I want to offer you advice, woman to woman. She stepped closer, close enough that Elowen could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive that Omegas like Elowen were never given. Lorcan is a charming man, handsome, well-positioned. I understand why you have clung to him for so long. I have not clung to anyone. Of course not. Malus smiled. But here is something you should know. Something I doubt he has told you. Before the feast tonight, Lorcan came to my quarters. Elowen felt ice spread through her veins. You are lying. Am I? Malus reached out and adjusted a strand of Elowen's hair, the gesture mockingly maternal. He told me he was not certain about his choice, that his father was pressuring him to claim someone, anyone, and you were convenient. Safe. A choice no one would challenge because no one else wanted you. Elowen's hands trembled at her sides. He also told me, Malus continued, her voice dropping to a whisper, that if someone better presented herself before the auction, he might reconsider. She stepped back, smoothing her own perfect hair. I simply thought you should know, so you are not surprised when he changes his mind. Malus turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing against the stone. Elowen stood frozen, her heart slamming against her ribs. She is lying. She has to be lying. But the doubt had already taken root. A tiny seed of poison planted in soil that had never been stable to begin with. Later that night, Bryn found her in the servants' corridor. I heard what Malus said to you. The servant's face was pale, worried. Elowen, you need to be careful. It was just words. She is trying to unsettle me. She is trying to destroy you. Bryn grabbed her arm, forcing her to stop. You do not understand. Malus has done this before. in the eastern settlements, before she came here. 3 Omegas were promised to Alphas. 3 times, Malus interfered. 3 times, the promises were broken. Elowen felt something cold settle in her stomach. Why are you telling me this? Because I have seen the way she looks at Lorcan. Bryn's voice was urgent, desperate. And I have seen the way Lorcan looks back. You are walking into a trap, Elowen, and by the time you realize it, it will be too late. Elowen pulled her arm free. Lorcan chose me, she said, the words feeling hollow even as she spoke them. He stood in front of everyone and said my name. Bryn's eyes were sad. Words are easy, she said quietly. It is actions that reveal the truth. She walked away, leaving Elowen alone in the corridor with nothing but shadows and doubt for company. Elowen could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Malus had spoken, every glance Lorcan had given her, every moment of the past 5 years, searching for cracks she might have missed. He chose me. He said my name, but the doubt would not quiet. Finally, sometime past midnight, she threw off her thin blanket and pulled on her boots. If she could not sleep, she would train. The training yard was the only place where her mind went silent, where the endless noise of fear and hope and doubt faded into the rhythm of movement. The yard was empty when she arrived, the snow untouched, the practice swords frosted with ice. Elowen picked up a blade and began to move, thrust, parry, spin, strike. Her breath came in clouds, her muscles burned, but the thoughts kept circling, refusing to release her. What if Malus is right? What if I am just convenient? What if— Your form is excellent. Elowen spun, her sword raised, her heart slamming into her throat. A figure stood at the edge of the yard. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in black that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. His face was partially shadowed, but she could see enough. A strong jaw, dark hair tied back from his face, and eyes that gleamed silver in the darkness. The Exile, Riven of Grimvard. Elowen's grip tightened on her sword. You should not be here, she said, hating how unsteady her voice sounded. Neither should you. He did not move closer, but his presence seemed to fill the entire yard nonetheless. Yet, here we both are. I was training. At midnight, alone, in the freezing cold. A flicker of amusement crossed his features. You are either very dedicated or very troubled. Elowen did not answer. Riven tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You are the one they call the wolf-less Omega. It was not a question. And you are the exile everyone fears. Elowen lifted her chin. It seems we both have reputations. Something shifted in Riven's expression, the faintest hint of a smile, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. You have fire, he said quietly. That is rare in this place. Fire does not matter when you cannot shift. Does it not? Riven took a single step forward, and Elowen forced herself not to retreat. I have seen wolves with all the power in the world who possessed nothing inside. No courage, no will, no flame. His eyes held hers. And I have seen those without wolves who burned brighter than any alpha I have ever known. Elowen swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this? Riven was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, rougher, because I watched you tonight, in the hall, when that boy spoke your name. That boy, not Alpha, not Lorcan, that boy. You looked like someone who has been starving, Riven continued, finally being offered a single crumb, and you were so grateful for it you did not notice it was poisoned. Elowen felt the words land like blows. You do not know anything about me. I know enough. Riven's gaze did not waver. I know he has kept you waiting for years. I know he has never committed to you publicly until his father forced his hand. And I know that the woman who cornered you in the corridor tonight has already begun to pull him away. Elowen's blood ran cold. How do you know about that? I watch, Riven said simply. I have learned that watching is often more valuable than speaking. He turned as if to leave, then paused. A word of advice. Elowen of Frost Hollow. Her name and his voice sounded different somehow, heavier, more significant. Do not place your worth in the hands of someone who has never been certain of it. You deserve more than crumbs. He walked into the shadows and vanished as silently as he had appeared. Elowen stood alone in the frozen yard, her sword hanging forgotten at her side, her heart beating in a rhythm she did not recognize. She should have been angry, should have been offended that a stranger, an exile, had presumed to lecture her about her own life, but all she could think about was the way he had looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her, as if she were something worth seeing. She returned to her quarters as the first light of dawn crept over the mountains, and for the first time in years the voice in her head was not whispering about Lorcan. It was asking a different question entirely. Who is he? The day before the auction, Elowen went looking for Lorcan. She found him in the stables, with Malus. They stood close together, too close, their heads bent toward each other in quiet conversation. Milas's hand rested on Lorcan's arm, her fingers tracing slow patterns on his sleeve. And Lorcan, the man who had promised to claim Elowen in front of the entire pack, was smiling at the golden-haired Omega like she was the sun itself. Elowen stopped in the doorway, her heart turning to stone. Lorcan looked up. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Guilt, perhaps, or annoyance at being caught. Then he smiled. Elowen. He stepped away from Malus, but not quickly. Not like a man who had done something wrong. I was just discussing the auction arrangements with Lady Malus. Arrangements? Elowen repeated flatly. Seating. Protocols. Lorcan's smile did not reach his eyes. Nothing important. Malus said nothing. She simply watched, venom gleaming in her eyes, her expression bright with triumph. Elowen wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers, wanted to grab Lorcan by the shoulders and shake him until he told her the truth. Instead, she heard herself say, I need to speak with you. Alone. Lorcan hesitated. That hesitation said more than words ever could. Of course, he said finally. Malus, if you will excuse us. Malus inclined her head gracefully and walked past Elowen without a glance, but as she passed, she whispered something so soft only Elowen could hear. Enjoy him while you can. Then she was gone. Lorcan approached Elowen, his expression shifting into something that was meant to be reassuring. You look troubled, he said, reaching for her hand. Elowen pulled back. Are you going to claim me tomorrow? The question hung between them like a blade. Lorcan's smile faltered. Of course I am. I said I would. Did I not? You have said many things over the years. Elowen's voice was steady, but inside she was fracturing. You have also done very little. Elowen. Lorcan sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know the waiting has been difficult, but tomorrow everything changes. I swear it. And Malus? What about her? She seems to believe she has a chance with you. Lorcan laughed. It sounded forced. Malus believes many things. That does not make them true. He stepped closer, cupping her face in his hands. You are the one I want, Elowen. You have always been the one. She wanted to believe him. Gods, she wanted to believe him so badly it felt like dying. Trust me, Lorcan whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. After tomorrow, you will never doubt me again. Elowen closed her eyes and let herself lean into him. That was her first mistake. The hollowed grounds were ancient. Carved into the frozen mountainside generations ago, the auction hall was a cathedral of ice and stone, lit by hundreds of torches that cast dancing shadows across walls etched with the names of every claiming that had ever taken place there. Alawan stood among the other unclaimed Omegas, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her teeth. The auction had begun an hour ago. One by one, Omegas had been called to the central platform. One by one, Alphas had bid for them. Gold exchanged hands. Names were recorded. Futures were sealed. Alawan watched it all through a haze of anxiety. Soon it would be her turn. Soon Lorcan would stand and claim her, and 5 years of waiting would finally mean something. Elo in a frost hollow. The auctioneer's voice echoed through the hall. Her legs felt like water as she walked to the platform. The crowd parted around her, and she could feel their stares, curious, pitying, contemptuous. The wolfless one, the broken Omega, the one no one wanted. She climbed the 3 steps to the platform and turned to face the hall. Hundreds of faces stared back at her. Alphas seated in the front rows, their expressions calculating. Betas and Omegas in the back, watching with varying degrees of interest. Elders along the sides, their ancient eyes weighing and measuring. And there, in the 3rd row, Lorcan. He was not looking at her. He was looking at his hands. Alawan of Frost Hollow. The auctioneer repeated. 23 winters, trained in combat, skilled in healing arts, unclaimed. The last word echoed like a curse. Do any Alphas present wish to make a claim? Silence. Alawan's eyes found Lorcan, begged him, pleaded with him. Stand up. Say my name. Keep your promise. Lorcan did not move. The silence stretched. 1 heartbeat. 2. 3. Do any Alphas present wish to make a claim? The auctioneer repeated, a note of impatience creeping into his voice. Nothing. Alawan felt the ground tilt beneath her. No, this cannot be happening. He promised. He swore. Lorcan. His name escaped her lips before she could stop it. A whisper that somehow carried through the silent hall. Lorcan, please. Every head turned toward the enforcer's son. Lorcan finally looked up, and the expression on his face, the guilt, the shame, the cowardice, told Elowen everything she needed to know. He cleared his throat. I withdraw my intention. The words hit her like a physical blow. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed, a single cruel sound that broke the dam. Whispers erupted everywhere. I knew it. He came to his senses. Who would want a wolf-less Omega anyway? She actually thought he would choose her. Alawan stood on the platform, exposed, alone, every nightmare she had ever had made flesh. The faces blurred together. The torchlight seemed too bright. The walls pressed in from every side. She could not breathe. She could not move. She could not even cry, because crying would give them exactly what they wanted. Final call, the auctioneer said, his voice now laced with poorly hidden disdain. Does any Alpha present wish to claim Eloan of Frost Hollow? The silence that answered was the cruelest sound she had ever heard. Eloan closed her eyes. This is it. This is how it ends. Alone on a platform in front of everyone who ever told me I was worthless. And then a voice spoke. Deep, calm, absolute. I will take her. Every head in the hollowed grounds turned toward the back of the hall. Riven stood in the shadows near the entrance, his black clothing making him look like a piece of the darkness itself. His silver eyes gleamed in the torchlight, fixed on Elowen with an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. The murmurs began immediately. The exile. Is he mad? He cannot be serious. The fallen king wants the broken Omega? The auctioneer looked as if he had swallowed his own tongue. Lord Riven, you are not a member of Frost Hollow. You have no standing to... I have gold. Riven's voice cut through the protest like a blade through silk. And your traditions state that any alpha of noble blood may participate in the auction. Or have your laws changed since my exile? The auctioneer stammered. The elders exchanged frantic glances. No one seemed to know what to do. Riven began to walk. The crowd parted before him like water before a ship's prow. His footsteps echoed against the stone floor, each one deliberate, measured, and inevitable. Elowyn watched him approach, her mind refusing to process what was happening. This is not real. This cannot be real. Riven stopped at the base of the platform and looked up at her. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The crowd, the whispers, the humiliation still burning in her chest. There was only him, and those silver eyes that saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had. Elowyn of Frost Hollow. His voice was quiet now, meant only for her. You do not have to accept this. The choice is yours. The choice is yours. Not a demand. Not a transaction. A choice. Elowyn's vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Why? The word came out broken. Why would you want me? Something shifted in Riven's expression, a crack in the armor he wore. Because I know what it is to be cast aside, he said softly. And I know what it is to be worth more than what others see. He extended his hand, palm up, fingers open, offering, waiting. The hall held its breath. Elowyn looked at that hand, looked at the man who had appeared from nowhere, who owed her nothing, who had chosen to step into the light for her when no one else would. She thought of Lorcan, still seated in the crowd, his face pale with shock. She thought of Maelys, whose triumphant smile had vanished. She thought of every voice that had ever told her she was worthless, defective, broken beyond repair. And then she stopped thinking. Her hand found his. The moment their skin touched, something inside Elowyn ignited. A spark. A flame. A roar of recognition that started in her chest and spread through every vein, every muscle, every bone. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Her vision sharpened. And somewhere deep inside, in the place that had been silent her entire life, something stirred. Awake. Elowyn gasped, her knees buckling. Riven caught her, one arm wrapping around her waist, holding her steady against him. Easy, he murmured against her hair. I have you. The crowd exploded into chaos. Elders shouted protests. Alphas rose from their seats. The auctioneer called for order that no one obeyed, but Riven did not acknowledge any of it. He simply held Elowyn, his body a shield between her and the world, his silver eyes fixed on her face with something that looked almost like wonder. You felt it, he said quietly. Did you not? Elowyn could not answer. She could barely breathe, but she nodded. And for the first time in her life, she did not feel broken. She felt found. Riven's home was not what Elowyn expected. She had imagined something dark, isolated, a cave or a ruin befitting a man who had spent 10 years in exile. Instead, the carriage brought them to a fortress hidden deep in the thornwood, a structure of black stone and ancient timber that rose from the forest floor like something grown rather than built. Torches burned along the walls, and guards in dark leather bowed as Riven helped her down from the carriage. This is yours? Elowyn asked, her voice still hoarse from the auction. It was my mother's, Riven said, before Grimvard, before everything. He paused, something flickering across his face. It is the one thing they could not take from me. The inside was warm, surprisingly so. Fires crackled in stone hearths, thick furs covered the floors, and the servants who greeted them did so with genuine respect, not the fearful deference Elowyn had witnessed in Frost Hollow. A woman with gray-streaked hair approached, her eyes sharp but kind. This is Helda, Riven said. She manages the household. She will show you to your chambers. Elowyn hesitated. My chambers? You did not think I would force you to share mine. It was not a question. Riven's expression was carefully neutral. Whatever happens between us, Elowyn, happens by your choice, not by obligation. There it was again. Choice. Helda led her through corridors lined with tapestries depicting wolves running through moonlit forests. The The chambers she was given were larger than any room Elowen had ever occupied, with a massive bed draped in white linens, a fireplace already blazing, and windows that overlooked the snow-covered trees. "If you need anything," Helda said, "you have only to ask." Then she was gone, and Elowen was alone. She stood in the center of the room, trembling. Everything had changed so fast. This morning, she had been an unwanted Omega awaiting her final humiliation. Now she was here, in the home of an exiled king, wearing the mark of his claim. "What have I done?" A knock at the door made her jump. "Enter," she managed. Riven stepped inside. He had changed from his traveling clothes into something simpler, a dark shirt unlaced at the throat, riding trousers, boots that looked well worn. "I wanted to ensure you were comfortable," he said. "I am." Elowen swallowed. "I think." The corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "You have questions." "I have 1,000 questions." Riven walked to the window, looking out at the darkening forest. "Then ask them." Elowen took a breath. "Why me?" "The truth this time. Not poetry about worth and flames. Why did you really claim me?" Riven was silent for a long moment. "Do you remember the first night you saw me?" he finally asked. "In the corridor at Frost Hollow? The silver eyes in the shadows." "Yes." "I felt something that night." Riven turned to face her. "My wolf felt something. A pull I have not experienced in 10 years of solitude. I told myself it was nothing. Curiosity. Instinct. But then I watched you at the feast. Watched you train at midnight. Watched you hope and doubt and fight. And I realized it was not nothing." Elowen's heart was pounding. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that my wolf recognized something in you." Riven's voice dropped lower. "Something that has been sleeping, waiting. I did not claim you to rescue you, Elowen. I claimed you because I could not bear to watch someone else fail to see what I saw." The fire crackled between them. Elowen should have been frightened, should have been suspicious. This man was a stranger, an exile, someone the entire North feared. Instead, she stepped closer. "And what did you see?" Riven held her gaze. "My mate." The word hung in the air like thunder. Before Elowen could respond, the sound of horses echoed from outside. Shouts. The clang of the gate being opened. Riven's expression hardened. "Stay here." He was gone before she could argue. Elowen waited approximately 10 seconds before following him. The courtyard was lit with torches when she arrived, and at its center stood the last person she expected to see. Lorcan. He looked disheveled, wild-eyed, his fine clothes muddied from hard riding. Behind him stood 2 of Frost Hollow's enforcers, their hands on their weapons. "You had no right." Lorcan's voice cracked with fury. "She was mine." Riven stood perfectly still, his arms crossed, his expression carved from ice. "She was never yours. You made certain of that when you abandoned her on that platform. I made a mistake. You made a choice." Riven's voice dropped to something dangerous. "And now, you must live with it." Lorcan's eyes found Elowen standing in the doorway. Something shifted in his expression. Desperation. Longing. The look of a man who only understood what he had lost after it was gone. "Elowen," he said, his voice breaking. "Please, come home. I will claim you properly. I will make it right." Elowen felt the words land in her chest. A week ago, she would have run to him, would have forgiven everything, would have taken whatever crumbs he offered and called them a feast. But that was before. Before Riven had looked at her like she was worth something. Before she had felt the spark of something awakening inside her. Before she had tasted what it felt like to be chosen without hesitation. "Go home, Lorcan," she said quietly. His face crumpled. "You cannot mean that." "I mean every word." Elowen stepped forward until she stood beside Riven. "You had 5 years to be certain of me. You were not." He was certain in 5 seconds. She turned and walked back into the fortress. Behind her, she heard Riven's voice, cold and final. "You heard her. Leave, and if you return, I will not be so merciful." Elowen did not look back. Later that night, Riven found her in her chambers, standing by the window. "That was brave," he said from the doorway. "What you said to him." It did not feel brave. Elowen turned to face him. It felt necessary. Sometimes those are the same thing. Silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Elowen moved first. She crossed the room in 3 steps, grabbed the front of his shirt, and kissed him. Riven made a sound, surprise or hunger. She could not tell. For one heartbeat, he was frozen. Then his hands found her waist, pulling her against him, and he kissed her back with an intensity that stole every thought from her head. This kiss was nothing like the gentle touches Lorcan had offered over the years. This was fire, desperation. A claiming that had nothing to do with auctions or traditions and everything to do with choice. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Riven rested his forehead against hers. "You are certain?" he asked, his voice rough. Elowen answered by pulling him back to her. Elowen woke in the middle of the night, certain something was wrong. No, not wrong. Different. Her body burned. Not with pain, but with heat that seemed to rise from somewhere deep inside, from a place she had never been able to reach. She sat up, gasping. The sheets were tangled around her. Sweat dampened her skin. And there was something else. A presence she had never felt before, pressing against the edges of her consciousness, alive, awake, demanding. Elowen stumbled from the bed, her legs barely holding her. She made it to the window and pressed her palms against the cold glass, desperate for something to anchor her. The moon hung full and bright outside, flooding the forest with silver light. And when Elowen looked at it, truly looked, something inside her answered, a howl that had been waiting 23 years to be released. The door burst open behind her. Riven crossed the room in 3 strides, his eyes already glowing gold, his wolf pushing dangerously close to the surface. "It is happening," he said, wonder and urgency warring in his voice. "Your wolf. She is waking." "I do not understand." Elowen's voice came out fractured, broken by waves of sensation she could not control. "It has been 23 years. Why now?" Riven cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Because you needed a catalyst." His thumbs traced her cheekbones. "Some wolves sleep until something wakes them. A bond, a recognition." His eyes burned into hers. A mate. The word shattered something inside her. Elowen screamed. Or maybe she howled. The transformation was nothing like she had imagined. It was pain and pressure and the feeling of her entire being rewritten from the inside out. Bones shifted, muscles stretched, skin gave way to fur, and through it all, Riven held her. He did not let go even when her hands became claws, did not flinch when her screams became growls, did not release her until the transformation was complete, and she stood before him on 4 legs, panting, trembling, and reborn. Elowen looked down at herself. Black fur, dark as the space between stars. Paws that seemed too large, too powerful. And when she caught her reflection in the window glass, she saw eyes that burned like molten gold. She was massive, larger than any Omega had a right to be, almost as large as the most imposing alpha males. Riven shifted beside her. His wolf was enormous, silver gray with eyes that matched his human form. He circled her slowly, and she felt his presence like a physical touch, a brush of recognition that resonated somewhere deeper than bone. "Mate," something inside her whispered. "Mine." Riven's wolf pressed his muzzle to her neck, and Elowen felt the bond lock into place. It was not a chain, not a cage. It was a key. The shift back came more easily than she expected. One moment she was wolf. The next she was human, naked and trembling on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Riven wrapped her in a fur blanket and pulled her into his arms. He was shaking too. She could feel it, as if he were barely holding himself together. You did it, he murmured against her hair. You found her. She was always there. Elowen's voice was raw with emotion. Waiting. I just could not hear her. And now? Elowen closed her eyes and felt her wolf settle inside her. No longer sleeping, no longer silent. Now I can hear everything. Riven pulled back to look at her. There was wonder in his eyes, but also something else, something almost like reverence. Elowen, he said slowly. Your wolf. Do you know what she is? What do you mean? Riven hesitated. In all the time she had known him, Elowen had never seen him hesitate. There are legends, he said finally. Old stories about a bloodline that was thought to be extinct. Wolves born of the first pack, the ones who walked with the moon goddess herself. Elowen felt ice spread through her veins. What are you saying? I am saying your wolf is not just an Omega's wolf. Riven's voice was quiet, odd. She is something far older, far more powerful. His hand found her face, tilting it toward the moonlight streaming through the window. You carry the blood of the ancients, Elowen, the bloodline that was supposed to have died 1,000 years ago. Elowen could not breathe. That is impossible. I watched you shift. Riven shook his head slowly. Your size, your presence, the way the very air seemed to bow around you. It should be impossible. And yet here you are. The room was silent except for the crackling fire. Elowen thought of her parents, the ones she had never known, who had died when she was too young to remember their faces. What were they? What did they leave inside me? This changes things, Riven said quietly. When word spreads, and it will spread, everything changes. Elowen looked at him. For better or worse? Riven's expression softened. That depends, he said, on what we do next. Word spread faster than winter wind. Within 3 days, delegations began arriving at Riven's fortress. Alphas from distant packs, elders who had not left their territories in decades, even emissaries from Grimvard, the kingdom that had exiled Riven 10 years ago. They came to see for themselves, the wolf-less Omega who had found her wolf, the ancient bloodline that had been declared extinct, the mate of the exiled king. Riven organized a formal gathering in the great hall of the fortress. It was, he explained, the fastest way to address the questions and put the rumors to rest. You do not have to do this, he told Elowen the morning of the gathering. You owe them nothing. I know. Elowen straightened the black and silver dress Helda had made for her. But I want them to see. I want them to know what they threw away. Pride flashed in Riven's eyes. Then let us show them. The great hall was packed. Alphas filled the front rows. Betas and Omegas stood along the walls. Elders occupied seats of honor near the dais where Riven and Elowen stood together. And at the back of the hall, barely visible behind a pillar, Elowen saw them. Lorcan, pale and hollow-eyed, looking like a man who had not slept in days. And beside him, Malus. Her golden hair was perfectly arranged, but her face was tight with barely concealed fury. They came to watch me fail, Elowen realized. They still believe I am nothing. The thought no longer hurt. Riven raised his hand, and the hall fell silent. You have come seeking answers, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. You have heard rumors of ancient blood awakening, of powers thought lost to time. He paused, his silver eyes sweeping the crowd. I could offer you words, explanations, arguments. He turned to Elowen. Instead, I offer you proof. Elowen stepped forward. She could feel every gaze fixed upon her. The doubt, the skepticism, the barely hidden contempt. Let them watch. She closed her eyes and called her wolf. The transformation was smooth now, painless, like stepping from one room into another. She felt her bones shift, her skin ripple, her senses expand 1,000-fold. When she opened her eyes, she was looking at the crowd from 4 feet higher than before. Gasps echoed through the hall. Elowen stood in her wolf form, massive and midnight black, her golden eyes burning with the light of the ancient bloodline that flowed through her veins. Power radiated from her in waves that made even the strongest alphas take involuntary steps backward. The eldest wolf in attendance, a gray-furred patriarch named Aldrich, who had traveled from the eastern mountains, fell to his knees. "Daughter of the first pack," he whispered, "the blood of the moon goddess." One by one, others followed. Alphas bowed their heads. Elders pressed hands to hearts in the old gesture of reverence. Even the emissaries from Grimvard dropped to their knees, their faces pale with shock. Elowen looked to the back of the hall. Lorcan stood frozen, his face the color of ash. Beside him, Milas had turned and was pushing toward the exit, her schemes crumbling around her like dust. For a moment, Elowen held Lorcan's gaze. She saw the regret there, the anguish, the devastating understanding of what he had lost. Good. She shifted back to human form, and Riven was there immediately, wrapping his cloak around her shoulders, his hand warm and steady on her back. "The rumors are true," Riven announced to the hall. "My mate carries the blood of the ancients, and any who question her worth question mine." No one spoke. No one dared. Later, when the crowds had gone and the hall stood empty, Elowen found herself on the balcony overlooking the thornwood. The moon hung heavy and bright above the trees, and for the first time in her life, Elowen felt it like a heartbeat, like a mother's voice calling her home. Riven joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. "How do you feel?" he asked. Elowen considered the question. She thought of the girl she had been, the one who stood in frozen training yards swinging a sword at shadows, the one who gathered crumbs from a man who never intended to give her more, the one who believed her worth was measured by a wolf that would not wake. That girl felt like a stranger now. "I feel whole," she said finally. "For the first time in my entire life, I feel like I finally belong somewhere." Riven turned her to face him. His silver eyes were soft in the moonlight, softer than she had ever seen them. "You belong with me," he said quietly. "Not because of blood or prophecy or tradition, because I choose you. I will always choose you." Elowen smiled. It was not the brittle smile she had worn for years, the one that hid pain beneath its surface. This smile was real. "And I choose you," she said. "The exile who saw me when no one else would. The king who claimed the unwanted Omega and made her his equal." Riven kissed her then, soft and slow, a promise rather than a demand. When they pulled apart, Elowen looked up at the moon one last time. "They called me broken," she whispered. "Defective. Worthless." And now? Elowen felt her wolf stir inside her, content and powerful and finally awake. Now they bow.